Good morning, everybody. It's great to be with you. Um, in my talk today, which I titled A to Z Practice Strategies, I just want to share with you some of the basic concepts and specific steps I have used over past many years in helping my students as developing pianists and to use for myself, which I find, have found and still continue to find very, very effective in advancing their ability to develop and get better as pianists and to play not just the notes, moving the fingers, but to understand through these practice strategies what the music is all about. It's funny, just before I logged on, I got a phone call from one of my students who actually happens to be my grandson. And he is, I'm having my studio recital tonight in Nichols Concert Hall, and he will be playing in it. And he called me because he was having last minute difficulties with a section of the Haydn Sonata that he's working on. He's very articulate and very verbal at the age of almost 13. And he was able to tell me exactly what his problem was, although I knew just from, the lessons that we have had. And I'm going to give you more and more examples later on, but I said to him, okay, you just became your problem just became a subject, a part of my talk that I'm giving in 10 minutes. And it had to do with a section of the two places in the E minor Haydn Sonata 1634. He was having problems towards the end with this section right here. Getting over from, and then a little bit later, let's see, where was it? Where did he have? No, it was earlier. Earlier in, a little earlier in the piece where he was having trouble with his left hand getting from here. And so what I had him do was in the part where the 16th notes, I had him cross over. I do this a lot, where one group of 16th notes is the accompaniment, the other group is the melody, but technically that crossover can be tricky and the hands sort of, get mixed up like trains crashing together on the same railroad track. So I had him do, and I'm sure that many of you do this a lot too. I had him cross over from the left hand 16ths to the right hand 16ths. Then I had him do the reverse and take the right hand and he did that a couple of times, and then I said, okay, now put it together. But first do it where you combine the left hand and play two notes at a time. And then if you have to, block it and do it that way. And he did, and then he played it as written, and he said, okay, that just solved a lot of problems. My fingers knew where to go. The same thing earlier in the movement, where the left hand, I had him play the octave in the first measure, hold the thumb E, and then move to the next one, because he was losing time and getting mixed up. And I said, you just have to stay with the 8th note beat and at the same time create the line. that's your baseline. And so he did that. He still had trouble a little bit. He has a tendency, so many students do, playing two-note Alberti bass type figures, moving his hand too much. And I'm working really hard with him to get him to move more from this joint right here, from the second joint, and on the thumb and the knuckle joint more, so that he doesn't rock his hand, because he's going to lose control if he does that. So he knows to do it, he just has to focus on it. And so I had him just play when he got to the A and the E, I had him play the A and the E together, and then the seventh, so that his hand knew how to move as a unit. And that helped immediately. And so I use strategies like this all the time. I listen to what the problem is, and then I have categories of different practice strategies that I plug in depending on what the point in the music, what happens, what the struggle is in the music. Sometimes it's technical, sometimes it's musical, and I'll get to that when I demonstrate a Chopin nocturne. 2 Chopin nocturnes, actually. And so he felt much more comfortable after I did this. And I find that if I sit and just practice from note to note to note slowly with a student, A, it's boring for them, B, it's boring for me, and it just doesn't always do the job. Sometimes not even in the beginning. I do a lot of chord practice. For instance, in Clementi, Opus 36, number 1. I have the students play the whole chord so that the hand feels what the distances are. I'm always asking my students to think intervallically, to feel the distance in their hands of a fourth with a third on top of it. And it's often that connection of what has to happen that the brain understands. Yes, the brain understands this is a chord, but the fingers have no idea. There's a translation process that has to go on between the two, and I'm constantly working on this with them, and they get so tired of hearing me say, how different did that feel on a scale from 1 to 10? And because I need to know if they actually have processed that feeling of intervals, and so that when they break it up, they have a feeling of a group of notes, which helps in the reading tremendously, and helps also in the phrasing, so that it doesn't sound. So that right away we start to infuse a little bit of the musical, the musical side of it, where where they have to feel how the phrase is moving ahead. So that the hand moves by groups of notes. I often, if there's unevenness that happens as a result of this, well, then we will do some of the long, short, short, long, and then the opposite, just so that the fingers really can feel the rhythm. Because I've become, with over so many years of teaching, and even in my own playing, that for me, and for what I try to get my students to do, that rhythm is the core of everything. It decides how the fingers move. It decides how evenly they move. decides the phrasing, it decides direction, it decides absolutely everything. Just everything for me comes from a rhythmical aspect. I want to make sure that I get everything in that I want. I wrote like 4 pages and I'm sort of glancing at them, but I'm departing a lot from it. I want to bring your attention to a book that an adult student of mine, I learned from my adults. I learn from my young students too. I learn probably more from them than they do from me. I always try to crawl inside their brains and see how they're thinking. Um, and it makes them nuts, but hey, I just, I don't care. I do it because I know that it helps them. But this adult student brought to my attention a book that was, I believe, when was it written? Copyright. Let me just look and see here. Copyright. I just got it from Amazon the other day, and 2005. It's been around for a while, but it's a book called The Practicing Mind. And the author is Thomas Sterner. Eric, you may know of him because he was trained as a jazz pianist. By the way, if you have any questions while I'm talking, you can put it in the chat box or just unmute yourself and say, hey, I have a question, about, if you need any kind of clarification from me about anything that I'm saying. But this book is all about mindful practice and being in the moment of what you are doing and not thinking about other things. And in this day and age, I mean, kids, I've had students, some of my high school students come into the lesson and they're on their phones texting with their friends, and they sit down and they're still texting, and I'm standing there and I say to them, either give me the phone or put it in your bag, but this is it, you're done. And it's just because of, in this age of social media and technology, it's so easy for students to be distracted. So I really work to make them look at the music and see what's going on. I mean, I walk them through it. I'm not, I don't ask them to do it on their own, not at all. But even with the young ones, it's a brain train thing. And then once it becomes something that they understand in their heads and their brains, then it becomes a translation to what happens right here. And that process takes a while. And all of these strategies that I use are directed at doing that, to understand the music so that when a student plays, they really know what they're doing so that they can express themselves musically and still function technically. Yeah, they enter a lot of competitions. Sometimes they win, sometimes, many times they don't. But the competition side of it is just part of a process, as everything is. And this mindful practice is really part of a process to train the brain to be in the moment and not think about other things, because you have something concrete to pay attention to. And the minute I ask them, I will ask them to play, say, starting in a certain measure. Even the young ones, all of a sudden they have to go on a treasure hunt and they have to search for, they have to look at that measure. And I usually do it kind of at the beginning of a section. I can't tell you how many times a student has said to me, can't I just play it from the beginning? And I said, no, that's not the idea. You can't play it from the beginning, because if you play it from the beginning, you're going to get stuck exactly where you got stuck. So let's start right here. Use your head, look at the music, see where it is on the keyboard, and we'll go from there. And then we use this whole, one of the strategies that is designed for that piece. When a student is first learning, I mean, I demonstrated the Clementi sonata, sonatina rather, uh, in terms of looking at the chords and actually playing the first few notes as chords. Then I ask them to look for the scales. And so the minute they realize I try to make a game out of it. I'll say, let's look for the scales. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to ask you to look for the scales. So start looking at the music. And I mean, they may never have seen the music before, but they can identify a scale because they've been practicing them. I have them always do scales. They always ask me why. And I said, because it'll make you play other pieces, the pieces that you have, so much better. And if you recognize the scale, you can play that already. In more specific and more advanced pieces, for instance, in Gardens in the Rain, I have a student working on it right now. When she first looked at the music, she said, oh my goodness, this looks really difficult. I said, well, yeah, a lot of notes on the page. But if you look at this in 3-note groupings, and you play it, in 3-note chords, all the way to where in the first section, and you do that a few times, your hand then knows where to go, and you understand what's going on, what's being repeated in the chord, from chord to chord, and what's changing, rather than just thinking it. We do that kind of practice too, but to understand it, that's what I do. So, I mean, across the board. And all music is made up of intervals, wide intervals, narrow intervals, repeated intervals, intervals that change by one note and then another note, and or chords, or 3-note chords, or more advanced pieces, 7th chords, and they learn harmony that way, and they don't even know it. I mean, because they will have been playing as part of technique. They have to play. They have to be playing first 3-note chords, then 4-note chords when the hand gets big enough. All of this is designed to help them learn in a more strategic way, a more codified way, more organized way. And wait, is there someone? Wait, let me just see. Nope, I don't have any questions. And they learn faster and they learn better. They may not like it in the beginning because it takes a lot of mental work. And I'll assign small sections of the same kind of technique. And then we go through the piece and see where that technique comes back. And usually it's at the end, or a modification of it in the middle. But we map out, no matter what the piece is, we map out what is going on in the music. So they have some idea of what to do going forward to play the same kind of repeated practice in another section, so they don't feel like the piece is endless. Pieces get a lot shorter when you know, mentally, rather. They're always the same length on paper and time, but mentally they get shorter once you know where you have repetitions of things. And oftentimes, well, all the time, really, after a while, they're able to find these repetitions themselves. It's not, and they're very, very, very pleased with themselves that they can do this. And I find that kind of organized thinking crosses over to their academic work, and they tell me that. I often ask students, especially high school students, if they're taking, a student who might be taking calculus or advanced calculus or any kind of advanced math, And if they're really good at, you know, at the math, I'll ask them, so what is the hardest thing that you do? They said, practice the piano the way you want me to. And I have to laugh because it's probably true. I mean, I have them thinking in all sorts of different ways, which I know makes them nuts, but it's really very helpful. What I'd like to go to now is demonstrate how I'll have a student practice a melodic line against a bass line. And for instance, a student of mine is working on, okay, the C sharp minor opus posthumous nocturne. And when she came to her lesson, like, she's got it all memorized, but her mindset was after the very beginning, and you start the melody, her brain was on eighth, 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 eighth. And so it sounded very notey and choppy, even though she could control the sound pretty well. So I had her take out the eighth note part of the beat, and we set the metronome. I use the metronome to help keep them steady, but I try very hard not to let them play metronomically after, you know, the first initial practices of just trying to stay with the metronome. And I do that because I play a lot with them. And so I try to get my feeling of the rhythm into their bodies, into their heads. But I had her take out the eighth note, and with the, I think we set the metronome at about 55 to the quarter note, and just had her do 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, so that her hand had more of a feeling of the larger harmonic picture. And then when we put it back in, her hand just, you know, she knew the notes, but her hand almost automatically started to, you know, feel the larger interval picture. So the hand would process 4 notes at a time. And she was so happy that she was able to do it almost, maybe not as well the first time, but the second time around, to feel it that way, because it sort of gave her a release. She didn't feel like she was, you know, constricted in any way. And that's what I try to get students to do so much, that if they understand what's going on in the music and they process it in groupings with the hands, all of a sudden, in many instances, the tension that often is up in the shoulders, you just see the shoulders drop, because all of a sudden they know what they're doing and they feel confident about it. And it's such a relief. It's just like a release in the shoulders. And it's really a wonderful thing to see. For the nocturne in E flat major that another student of mine is working on now, I wanted to make sure that the student understood where the bass line is in relation to the melody line. So at the same time, process mentally what's happening in the chords. Oh, Rio. I'm sorry. Oh, I have 2 minutes, right? Hello? I have 2 minutes left? Thank you. Okay. Got lots of examples, won't even get to them. So I have them do the left hand. Because by that time the hand is big enough. If you can play this piece, the hand has to be, pretty much big enough to handle that. So I'll have them do that first. Then I'll have them do, because oftentimes I get this absent-minded presentation of, makes me crazy. I said, no, you can't do that. So I'll have them do. So just playing the chords. And after that, I'll have them do. So they have to feel the beat when there is no note there. One and one and two and three and four and one and two. So all of a sudden, when they put the whole thing together again, they're much more aware of mentally of that harmony that completes and fills in the melodic line, and the hand processes it as one unit but two chords. That's so much the case in Chopin. So I have a lot more, but I'm going to yield to Eric now. Thank you so much for listening.
Wow. Thank you, Elaine.
You're welcome, Eric. Eric, as much as I'm going to have to get a lesson with you on everything that you do today. The day is so filled. I have a rehearsal with Milana at 3:30, and I have my recital at 5:30. I have to go and practice. Sorry. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Elaine. Elaine has been a long time friend over at Music Institute. First, I just want to say a very fast hello to so many friends and colleagues. Pat, I see the ever brilliant Julie. Hi there, Julie. I see another Eric S., but he's young and has hair. So this is a challenge of mine. There's, of course, Jeff. Dr. Jeff, it's always great to see him. Know him well, and Elaine and Terry and so many others. There's my dear friend Emmy and Linda Barker, my fellow bird lover, and Susan. So I just want to say hi to everybody. Hopefully I don't miss anyone. If so, my apologies. Okay, guys, so we don't have a lot of time. So I'm going to try to get really ripping with this material. We're going to go super fast. So I thought it would take me a little bit longer, but I put a copy of the lead sheet that we'll refer to today in the chat. So hopefully you have it. It's Ain't Misbehavin'. It's sort of on the verge of public domain. I mean on the verge because I actually looked it up, and I think there's like literally months before it's considered to be in public domain. Okay, so the presentation is going to be on reading a lead sheet. And I have to say that this has been something that as a classically trained musician, Lena, yeah, it should be in the chat, Lena. Hi, by the way, should be in the chat. So you should be able to download it from the chat. I put it in there, so you should be able to click on it and download it. Oh, okay. Well, let me see if I can send it again. I'm not sure.
Eric?
Yeah.
I can try and upload it. I uploaded it at the beginning of the meeting. I can do it again.
All right, that would be really great. Thanks, Jerry. I appreciate it. So everybody, the sort of the art of leading the sheet, reading a lead sheet is truly sort of an art form. That is, you don't have chord symbols written exactly the same way, right? So you'll see, for instance, a dash might be for minor. Other times you see just a small m. Other times you might see an MIN. So there is no one universal default for writing chord symbols. So I'm going to save you what I feel. I've often said this to people. I said, this would have saved me many, many years if somebody would have explained this to me. Truly years, because it was confusing for many, many years. So I would encourage everybody to think about it in terms of families. So obviously your main family is in terms of reading chords. You of course have major, you have minor, and then you have dominant, right? Now, all the other chords like diminished or half diminished or sus chords, augmented chords, I'd say they're more like specialty chords. They're just not in the main families of major, minor, dominant, okay? So one of the most important things to understand is that if you see something like this, depending upon, here we go, you see a C, right? So this could mean, it could mean just a C major triad. It could mean a C6. It could mean a C major 7. It could mean a C with the 6 and a 9th. It could mean a C major 9th. It could mean any of those things. So do keep in mind that what it depends upon is the style, right? So if you're playing like a Beatles tune like Hey Jude or Let It Be, or if you're playing for church and you're playing some more basic hymns and you throw in a C major 7th, everybody in the choir might turn around and really stare at you very hard, and say, what are you doing, right? So again, you really have to consider what the style is. One other thing that's super, super important, again, I see this all the time. We'll have a number of adult students that I've taught over the years and currently teach that will look at something like this, like when I was younger, and they'll see a C7, right? So the C7 could just be a C7, but it could also be a C7 where you're adding the 9, so it'd be written as a C9. It could be a C13. It could be a C7 flat 9. So the thing is that you have a whole wide range of options. That's why I think it's important to think of it in terms of a family, right? So just think it's a dominant family, and what you do to dress up the chord is really just going to be what's appropriate for the situation at that time, okay? The minor is actually a little bit more complicated, and I'll just explain why. So for instance, if you see something like, a C minor 7th, right? C minor 7th. So you're looking at that, then it could be the 2 chord, it could be a 3 chord, it could be a 6 chord, right? It could be any of those, but it also could be a 1 chord. So sometimes you'll see like a C minor 6, which would be considered the 1 chord of the tonic chord, but a C minor 7th could also be considered a 1 chord, depending upon the piece, just depending upon where things are musically with the piece. Very often is considered a 2 chord. So if you see a minor 7th chord, you again can add a 9th often. You could add maybe an 11th. You can maybe turn it into a 6. So you want to say it's roughly, certainly within the minor, or it is in the minor family, but it could be, maybe a secondary chord to get somewhere else, or it could be your final destination, which would be a 1 chord, okay? So looking at some exercises that I'll ask students to do, I ask almost all my students to do this stuff. If you see the keyboard or not, I would say it's almost immaterial. You guys are going to know all of this, and I'm going to whip through this at light speed. So the first thing I ask everybody to be able to do, and when you have for your students, what you want to consider is that you're basically going to scale this material depending upon their experience and their skill level, right? So I might have my students just start out where they'll say, here's the C major scale. So that's the first step, right? Then I say, play the triads and be able to name them. So they have to name the C major, D minor, E minor, F major, D major, A minor, B diminished, and C major. The next step is going to be playing the triads and doing the inversions, right? So they have to be able to play C major root first, second, right? D minor root first, second. The next step is going to be playing the 7th chords. So I'll have them play C major 7th, D minor 7th, E minor 7th, F major 7th, G7, A minor, B. I call it a B half diminished 7th or B minor 7 flat 5. Either way is absolutely fine. You'll see it written both ways. The next step would be to play the 7th chords and to go through the inversions. So I'll ask them C major 7th root, first, second, third root. D minor 7th root, first, second, third root. Okay. The next step I ask people to do is to do a block chord. So the block chord is a little bit tricky in terms of the definition, because a block chord could be thought of in different ways. But I'm using it in this particular instance as saying that if you play your one position chord, your C, E, G, and B, and then you play a B below it, so you're doubling the 7th. So you're kind of creating, if people remember this. I'm older than everybody here, I think. Like if they call it like a George Shearing, but every single jazz pianist, as well as like, so, you know, I mean, Debussy and Ravel and Gershwin, everybody would use this, even Beethoven. Right. So you have these block chords where you're doubling the melody on the outside. So this would be C major 7, D minor 7, E minor 7, F major 7, G7, A minor 7, B half diminished 7, C major 7. That would be the next step that I ask them to do in learning scales. The next one is going to be doing drop twos. The drop twos, so I'm going to play the C major 7th, but I'm going to drop the alto voice or the fifth note. I'm going to drop it down an octave. So C major 7, D minor 7, E minor 7, F major, and so on. It's a great sound. It's a beautiful sound. There are actually entire books that would be written on, let's say, drop twos, or entire books or like pamphlets or studies just on block chords, just by themselves. Literally, you can find a book like Mark Levine is a book on just drop twos. It's a phenomenal sound. Okay. The next thing I want my students to be able to do is to play the root and fifth in the left hand, the third and seventh in the right hand. Root, fifth, third, seventh. Go up the scale and so on, right? The next thing is going to be playing the root, fifth, and seventh in the left hand and the third in the right hand. Right? So that's going to be that. And then the next one is going to be root and seventh in the left hand, third and fifth in the right hand. And then you go up this way, right? The next one is going to be the root in the left hand, and then it's going to be 3, 5, and 7 in the right hand. So root left hand, 3, 5, and 7 in the right hand. Okay. All right. The next section gets into what I call my like Bill Evans section. And this is a little bit more complex, but what it does is it teaches students to start to listening to some inner voices and to understand that you can actually be moving the inner voices in different ways. All right. So before I do that, is there any question on the previous stuff? Anything? No, everyone's good. Super. Okay, very good. So the Bill Evans sections.
Eric.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You said something about a drop say, I don't know what you were talking about.
Yeah, the drop twos. Yeah, I first I have to tell you, I love drop twos. They're a phenomenal sound, gorgeous sound. So the drop two means that what you're doing is you're dropping the second note from the top. So you're dropping your second note from the top. So in the case of a C major 7, if I have a C, E, G, and B, right? C, E, G, and B. So there's that root position, right? Basic root position. So if I drop the G, I'm taking the G and I drop the G down an octave. So you see how that opens? It's really beautiful, right? You hear that all the time in music. It's a great way. So it's a great way to fill up sounds or to fill up a measure, right? Is that okay? Yeah, perfect. Thank you. All right, so the next part is what would be a Bill Evans section. This is, you know, how do you take a jazz genius like Bill Evans and you try to like synthesize it down to a few exercises? Of course, you can't do that. It's again, no, it's not an attempt to do that. No, please, nobody out me on Facebook or anything. It's not an attempt to do that. It's just a way to kind of open up people's ears and to understand that you can do some other things with this very static, right? All of this stuff is super, super static, but as you're going to see in a few minutes, it's not going to be super static shortly, okay? So it's just super static now. It will change quickly. So you're looking at a root, a fifth, a seventh in the left hand, and then I'm going to do 3, 7, and 3 in the right hand. So it's 1, 5, 7 in the left hand, 3, 7, 3 in the right hand. So obviously you can just go up and you can play these chords, the chords along the axis of the scale. So what I ask students to do, and there's a bunch of different things you can do here, guys. It's not even a total list of it. I'll give you some of the ideas and you'll get the general framework of this. So I'll ask them to do play 6, 7, or I'm sorry, I said that backwards. 7, 6, 7, 6, 7, 6, 7, 6, 7, 6, 7, 6, 7. I'm sorry, I can't talk and do this. 7, 6, 7, 6, right? So you're playing the 7 to the 6, 7, 6, 7, 6. So it's a really beautiful sound, right? Okay. The next thing that I start to ask them to do then are to do what would be called enclosures, or you can also call them a surround, and that's to surround the seventh. So for instance, you can go down. So I'm starting with this B, going B, A, C, B. And then for the D minor seventh is C, D, right? So what I did is I went to the lower neighbor. So it's kind of like I went here, then I went here, and then I went back here, right? So you're kind of doing this little dance step, you know, you go down, up, above, and then you go back to your target. So you can also reverse that, right? You can start, if you're starting with this chord, our initial chord, we can, right? That time I went up, right? So I start with the 7, 8, 6, 7. I do 7, 8, 6, 7, 7, 8, 6, 7. Right? So these are all diatonic. That is, it's just staying within the key, right? We can do these where we're also adding some chromaticism to it. So for instance, it might be, I'm not as fond of that, but it's okay. This one is all right. E minor. That sounds kind of nice, right? So there's just different ways that you can start to create some chromaticism with it. You can even do a surround going to the 6, which is really pretty. So here's this C major 7. Isn't that nice? So you can stay within the key entirely, or you can go outside of the key to create a little bit of some chromatic movement there, right? So like I already said a few times, I want to bore everybody with it, but really the purpose is to just to get people to say, oh, there's these inner voices, inner movements, okay? All right, much other stuff on scales. I like to do what are called four-way close, and then there's block chords, four-way close. There's a lot of stuff regarding that, but I think for now, though, I think this is pretty good. All right, so now we're going to hit the lead sheet. Do we have any questions about that before we hit the lead sheet? No? Okay. So I've had young students, young peeps will do this. And, you know, so kids with like small hands and not a lot of movement. So everybody, I'm going to run through this super fast. I'm going to do it from the ground up. So depending upon the level of your student, you'll have to decide where you want them to start with this. So I'm going to give you the very basics and we're going to race right through it. All right. So the first thing that could be done is you can play only the root. Right? So you're only playing the root. Now, when you're teaching this to somebody, you could play the root and they'll play the melody, or you can ask them to play, since it's probably going to be the melody might be more complicated for, let's say, an AIM level 2 or 3 student. So you can ask them to play the bass and then you play the melody. And usually they're pretty psyched by that, right? You know, because they're like, oh, wow, I'm doing a duet. It sounds really cool. A number of reasons why I like.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I'm sorry, Eric.
Yeah.
I'm having a little trouble hearing you when you're playing the piano.
Mm-hmm.
And this is such a beautiful song. Do you have original sound on? Or maybe it's me. Is anybody else having trouble?
I agree. The quality is not good. Do you have original sound for musicians with your?
Let me, I can go and see what I can do to, let's see, I would go to, what do I go to? Oh, audio settings.
Yes.
And it says sound for very old bald people. Is that what I need? Is that the one? Audrey, is that the one?
Original sound for musicians.
Okay. All right. Yeah, it's actually on original sound for musicians.
All the 3 things are checked?
It's high fidelity. How about echo cancellation and stereo audio?
And then on the next page, the advanced settings
Okay.
to auto.
Uh-huh.
And now, do you have a original sound for musicians icon in your at the top left of your screen?
I do not see anything. I see Cynthia at the top. Oh, wait, maybe I do. Is that little green check?
Okay, yeah. Does it say on?
No, it says off.
Turn it on. Click on it.
Okay. How's that?
Well, I'll let you know when we hear
All
it.
right.
Yep.
Okay. Well, we'll find out. So how's this? Is that any better?
Better.
Better.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. All right. I'm glad you guys are telling me this. Thanks, Aubrey. I appreciate it. So anyways, any questions about that before I race forward? So everybody, you can play that bass line, right? You can play a super, super simple bass where you're just playing these half notes, right? You can do this idea. Okay? So before I teach any chords, what I then next teach is I try to get them to do a little bit of some variation in the left hand. Again, not a single chord. And that's very purposeful because I don't want people to be, I don't want them to be intimidated by the chord symbols, right? I don't want them to be freaked out by them. I want them just to do this so that they're enjoying themselves and having fun. So I keep looking at this as a premise. Are they going to enjoy themselves and have fun? Because if that's not happening, they're not going to want to do any of this, right? So I'll say, let's look at this idea. So what you're doing is you're putting in a dotted quarter note, eighth note idea, right? So what I call those, and many players will call those, are bumps, right? So they're looking at the dotted quarter note, eighth note as a bump. Right, so it's looking, obviously, it's looking like this, right, guys? Yeah, so you can reverse that to where you're doing a half note, dotted quarter note, and an eighth note. So, right, it can be this, right? And it can be continuous where you're doing the dotted quarter note, dotted quarter note, eighth note. So the question that comes up, right, all of you will say, well, when do you use what when? Well, I try to get everybody to master, literally every single pattern. But sometimes the coordination is more difficult for some. So if the coordination is more difficult, we might then just pare it back to only the half notes, right? But I want them to be able to do this. So listen to this. Right? Now, that's not the most musical choice here, right? Because you have this space in the melody at the end of the measure, so you want to actually put the bump there, right? So you'll hear this. Right? Sounds a lot better, right? Sounds much better, yeah. When you have a measure where you have just one harmony for the entire measure, like you do in the bridge, like for the A minor, I encourage people to play the root in the fifth. You can play the root in the fifth where it's going higher, right? So that it goes root up to the fifth, but it doesn't have to go up to the fifth. It can go down to the fifth. So. Okay. Now, what will happen when people can do that well, they're usually pretty psyched about it. So I start to introduce then passing notes in the bass. The passing notes, we could actually be here for a little while talking about all of that. So I'm going to race through it. My apologies for not explaining it more, but we just won't have time. But here we go. This would be an idea of passing notes. So you can hear that you can get a lot accomplished and not a single chord is played, right? There's no chords that are played, but you can get a lot happening, right? You see what I mean? So I really think it's super, super important to be able to play a whole bass line that way. So I really would think about establishing it as, like polytonality, so that you're really having a melody line and you're having a bass line. Okay, chords. So what I try to do, and I try to tie this into like students, if you're looking at AIM level 4 or 5 even, you can think about just asking them just to play major minor triads, right? So you have, and the funny thing about that over the years is like students that know nothing about jazz, nothing, or if they like it or not like it, not a single thing, they end up being like obsessed with this. I give them this. I have this little girl, she does horseback riding and everything, and her parents say whenever there's a piano, she always sits down and plays Ain't Misbehavin' about 5 times, right? And she just runs through it, of course. She's just completely destroyed the tempo and the rhythm, but she just races through Ain't Misbehavin'. So it's nice, at least that they're enjoying that. So when they're doing like Christmas stuff, right? Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Jingle Bells, Santa Claus is coming to town. This is like a great way to go. Okay. So obviously, guys, this is an awful solution like for the long term, right? It sounds horrible. You're not going to just play triads, right? So the next thing that I would recommend is then you just play the full chord in the left hand. Now, as we all know, the full chord in the left hand is going to be kind of yucky, right? It's not a permanent solution. The purpose of it is to really make sure that people understand, or your students understand, how to form the chords, right? So they know here's a root, third, fifth, and sixth, or here's a root, third, fifth, and seventh, right? It's not like a permanent way that you play. You go, wow, Oscar Peterson will do this. No, it's not that way at all. But you can break it up so you can actually make that a bit more interesting. So check this out. If you just play it static, all these root position chords, right? Right, so I'm playing the full chord in the left hand. But really, if I wanted to, and just comp a little with that, right, where I'm not wedded to always playing on the first beat or third beat, even that, which is kind of a very sort of boring static way to play, can be more interesting. So even though it's not an attractive way to play, you can make it more attractive. You can dress it up a little bit, and make it a little bit more interesting, okay? All right, so the next step that I would do is kind of addition by subtraction. Now this is going to sound a lot more like what you would hear from professional players, and that is you can have an option in the left hand to just play the root and seventh, right? Sometimes the root fifth and seventh, depending, because obviously the chord is going to be too thick sounding, right? It's going to be too thick and too heavy if you're always playing the root, third, fifth, and seventh. So you can have something like this now. The 6 chords, by the way, are not very good with just a root and a 6. I don't recommend that. They just aren't very stable that way. Root and a 7. So for instance, when you have an A7, just playing the A and the G, or the D minor 7th, playing the D and the C, or the G7, playing the G and the F is a better way to go. So here's how that would sound. So it's already more interesting, right? And it's thinning out the texture of the chord. But even before we get into the more advanced stuff right now, even if before we get into that, if you start combining what you've learned with the bass and with those chords, again, it could be kind of like startling how good it can sound even just putting that together. So you might start out with something like this, chords maybe, bass, chord, bass, chord, bass. So that still is just using, it's just using the bass stuff, right? And I'm coming up and playing the chord. So again, it's not something that's going to happen instantly for almost anybody. But just so you know that even before you do super advanced techniques, you can actually get a lot of mileage out of that. Okay? All right, so now you might say, why did I bother going through this whole entire scale thing with everybody, right? You're like, come on, that's crazy. Why do that? Well, let's see. If you look at Ain't Misbehavin', let's look at some of those advanced techniques. Let's look at that block chord idea. So check this out. So that's using the block chords, right? It's using block chords. It could be done where I could do it where I'll split it up this way. Okay, now the A7, I'll play the root in 7th in the left hand. Here's the G, so that means for my right hand I can put in a 3rd, I can put in a 5th. So or the G7, here's a G and F in the left hand. The A, the melody is here. Then in my right hand, here's the 7th and the 3rd, or maybe I can put in the 5th. So doing that type of scale work allows you to see how you can divvy up and you can kind of spread the chords out between both hands. So you start getting a much, much greater range of harmonic possibilities when you're playing a tune like this. Keep in mind, it still is rather simple. I'm not, putting in 9ths and 13ths and except what's in the melody or passing notes or all sorts of things. It's just trying to keep it fairly basic. Yeah. So there's, of course, a lot more to the subject, but I think in a half an hour, I think that covers a lot of ground. Are there questions? Anybody have any questions about it? There's a lot more to the subject, as you all know. Yes. Do you just want to unmute yourself?
Do you mostly use half steps when you do the bass, when you do the walking bass?
The walking bass is a really good question. So the walking bass would be, it's a combo, right? It's a combination. You can do some walking bass movements. So for instance, if you look at the 1-6-2-5 in the very beginning, so you have 1, 6. So that was keeping it all diatonic, right? That was just staying within the scale, yeah? But it could be maybe that's a half step, and then 2 half steps. So I would say it all depends. Hey, Jeff, thanks for joining. You have to consider that you have those possibilities. That's really important, guys. So when I was young and had hair, and with years of classical training, I used to always think that things would be like just a certain way, like you play that beautiful Chopin nocturne in C sharp minor that Elaine was playing. Say, well, you can only do it this way, you can only do such and such. But no, there's, I think what appeals to a lot of people, including myself, by the way, with looking at the lead sheets, is that there's, so many different ways to do this, right? But it's super important. What I've really found, and I can say this with all candor, I have not seen like what I'm showing you guys and what I've done for other, teachers groups. I've not seen any of this in a book. Nothing like that. It's just been over years and years of doing it. Like, what's a way to give this to people that it doesn't intimidate them? It's fun. It's friendly. It's enjoyable. People can ratchet it up to an advanced level if they want, or they can keep it at another level that's more comfortable for them, depending upon their experience and skills. Yes, there was a book. I actually wrote a book on the whole baseline thing years ago, and I only have a couple copies left. So, anyhow, it's a lot of stuff, and it's something that I think is a huge amount of fun. I wish I had just more time just to show you guys a lot of the other possibilities, but it's cool stuff though. Are there other questions? I'm happy to stay. I know we're supposed to be out of time, but I'm more than happy to spend the extra time if anybody has any questions. No? That's it? Wow. Okay. All right. So last...
question.
Yeah.
What other pieces do you choose besides the Christmas ones?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great question. So, I like to do the way I like to do it is I want people to feel super comfortable with this sort of stuff. So I try to give them pieces that are in the key of C and that have a similar chord progression. So if they're doing like right now, like Ain't Misbehavin', right? So Ain't Misbehavin' is a 1-6-2-5 in the key of C. That's almost the entire tune, right? So then I'll give them something like Satin Doll. I like a lot because again, it's in the key of C, right? Even though you have little modulations within the piece, right? All these pieces have modulations, right? They'll temporarily go into another key. Like Ain't Misbehavin' goes into the related minor, goes into A minor in the bridge, right? I like to do A Train. I like to do All of Me. All those are in the key of C, right? So Santa Claus is Coming to Town. That's in the key of C. That's a lot of fun. Nice bass line movement. There are a lot of 1-6-2-5, right, Julie? Lots of 1-6-2-5 in that, yeah. So, and then once they start to get that, then I like to give them some pieces in the key of F. Because I know that there's going to be, from the related keys, there's going to be a chunk of stuff, right, that they've already done in C. So I try to build up their skills that way, so they're always learning some new chords, and yet they have some stuff that they're comfortable with, right? You know, does that make sense? I hope, yeah. So like, for instance, I have a student who's he asked one of my adult students, you know, we had several of these key of C pieces, and he was doing, Sunny Side of the Street. That's another good one I like to use. That's in the key of C. And so then he says, well, let me try something else. So, you know, he said, I love Over the Rainbow. So I gave him Over the Rainbow in E flat. And he's just like dying. He's absolutely dying. And I'm saying, you do realize, you know, this is still the same concepts. He's like, yeah, but it's an E flat. I go, oh, well, you know, so you asked for it, you know. So anyways, better to try to keep similar keys so people can build up their confidence. All right.
I have one other question.
Yes.
When you started doing the drop two melody and your chords, how are you doing that?
Okay, so you mean for Ain't Misbehavin' or for yeah, so Ain't Misbehavin', I didn't do the drop twos yet. I could go through it with the drop twos. I was doing it as a block chord. So the block would be here. This is hopefully you can see it on the piano. So I'll explain it, all right? So here's middle C, right? So I'm playing below middle C, C, A, G, E. Now I'm going to play the melody. So the melody, I'm just doubling, right? I'm just doubling the melody, right? So it's like a sandwich. The melody is down here in my left hand, up here in my right hand. And in between that, I'm putting the chords, right? So it's like this. It's a wonderful sound, right? Isn't it great?
Very nice.
Yeah. This can all be expanded where you can do this as an octave. So you can make it really big. You can make it small. You can do all sorts of things with it. That's, again, why I think it's so much fun. You can decide a really big sound, like, you know, that cuts through everything, that, like, bam, it wakes people up right away. You can decide if you want to do it. You can do it as a stride. You can do it as walking tense. You can just do so many different things with it. So my advanced students, I try to get them to circle through all 12 keys with this. I say, let's just play it, because then they're learning a 1-6-2-5 and how to modulate to related minor. And rather than doing it in an AIM context or reading like a theory book, like I like using the fundamentals of piano theory, it gets them to put it in a reality context, right? You know, they're having to do this as like, this is reality. So that's a good thing. Yeah. All right. Any other questions? No? Wow, I can't believe I questioned everybody out. That's amazing. Okay, very good. So last week, I'm so glad that, and Cynthia, thank you so much for getting this to work. I tried going downtown. I live in Wheeling to see the Salvador Dali exhibit and the Van Gogh. And after an hour and a half of driving, I got as far as DePaul, and I had to stop and turn around. It was just the traffic was too bad. So I stopped and visited my alma mater. So anyways, and that's about it. Then went home. So I'm glad we could get this going on Zoom. All right. Okay, everyone. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Wow. You know, it's interesting. There was a theme, actually, a line theme between Elaine and yours, is the importance of the chord. You know, in her message, I don't know if did you hear it?
Oh, yeah.
About when she was working with a student, like doing something Opus 36,
Yeah.
to feel the intervals of the notes, play it as a chord, and you, of course, you know, knowing the chord is the essence of so much, rather than just reading individual notes and hoping to play them well or play them correctly, you know, to understand.
Well, it's amazing to me. I mean, not to digress, I hope you guys don't mind if I say this, but it's amazing to me how much more I've understood of Chopin or Ravel or Debussy from the years of playing jazz and everything. So like one program that I do, no, don't worry, it's not an advertisement. Don't worry, everybody, I promise. But for instance, if I say if you take this in D flat major, like this Rainbow Prelude, if you say here's a passing note or an approach note, just to a major triad. Doesn't that sound very Chopinish, right? But these are the same sort of techniques that are used by, you know, all the great jazz players. Just approach notes. It's just simple. And then there's surrounds. And if you look at Beethoven and Chopin and Bach, you see the same exact things over and over and over again. The same exact ideas. So, all righty. Well, thanks again, everybody. I so appreciate it. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be able to see so many of my friends and colleagues, and some that I don't see very often. But from my heart, I really greatly appreciate being invited to do this for our sister chapter out in Chicago. But if there's anything...
Also, Yumi said to say hello.
Okay, right. Good. And if there's anything that anybody has any questions on, I think you can find me on Facebook, or you might have my email already, or you can ask Cynthia or so many others, or Julie or others, I think, or Jeff for my email or whatever. You can contact me. So, okay? All right. Thank you so much again, everybody. I really appreciate it. We'll catch up with you soon, I hope. All right. See y'all. Bye-bye.